Hi, and welcome to our masterclass today. Hi, everyone, just everyone joining. Some more people. Hi, everyone. Hey, Nick, good to see you here today. Right as your camera turned off, and I encourage people to leave their cameras on. We love presenting to faces. We love seeing the feedback. So hello to everyone. So welcome to our masterclass today, which we've created especially for the entrepreneurship community here at Monash on hiring diverse teams. My name is Lloyd Gordon. I'll be your host and MC today. I'm the Communications and Marketing Manager here at The Generator. We support startups and entrepreneurs throughout the Monash community. But firstly, I wish to acknowledge the people of the Kulin Nations, the traditional owners of the land on which we are gathered today, and throughout, and the traditional owners of the land from wherever you are joining us today. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. I also warmly pay my respects to all Indigenous staff, students, and guests who are joining us today. In many Kulin Nations languages, Wominjeka can be translated to welcome, but also with purpose. So I ask you all to come with purpose to today's session, Wominjeka. Just a bit of housekeeping to start off with. We'll be recording so we can provide you with a replay and share segments with those that might have intended on coming but got held up for whatever reason. We do need to stick to time. We have some wonderful guests here from Kinde who'll be sharing their knowledge with us today. So please be attentive. Any questions that you have, we can ask in the chat, sing out. But enough from me. Let me introduce you to Sam Garven, the Head of People and Culture at Kinde. She has an extensive career helping companies build their teams, most recently at Zip. She knows that with limited resources, hiring the right people when you need them and building a well-rounded, diverse team can feel difficult to balance. So how do you attract those first hires? Where do you begin? Please welcome Sam Garven.
Thank you for the introduction, Lloyd. Hello, everybody, and hello to my other two giants on the call as well. I'm Andre and Ollie. Really happy to be here today. I'm really excited that this topic is so front of mind for many of you at such an early stage as well. It's a really important one for people to start thinking about from day one. So I'm super excited to share my knowledge with all of you. So let me just share my screen. All right, Lloyd, give us a thumbs up if you can see. Fantastic. So do shout out questions as we go. I know that sometimes when you see something really interesting, you think, oh, I want to ask more about that. I'll ask about it later, and then later comes and you have no idea what it is that you did want to ask. So pop them in the chat and Lloyd can shout them out at me, or take yourself off mute and just ask them directly to me as well. I absolutely love it when it's not just me talking and when it's all of us talking together. Or if you do have a question that is like a really meaty one that you want to bring up at the end, there is of course a Q&A a little bit at the end. Okay, cool. So let's jump in. So I know that Lloyd has already done an acknowledgement of country. I'm actually in Canada at the moment. I am Canadian, so I'm with my parents right now. And so I just want to do an acknowledgement of territory. So here in northern Saskatchewan in Canada, I'm in Treaty 6 territory, which is the homeland of the Métis. I just want to acknowledge that, the First Nations people here in Canada as well are the traditional custodians of the land, and this land will always be Aboriginal land. Ooh. Hi, I'm Sam. So as Lloyd mentioned, I'm the head of people and culture here at Kinde. My background is in talent acquisition. So I've been doing recruiting for a very long time. At Zip, I moved into from recruiting into more of a social impact role. So focusing on diversity, equity, and inclusion, both through our recruitment process as well as within our Zipster community across the globe. I also did some work across learning and development internally across all of our different parts of the organization. I also just finished my master's degree, so I feel all of you who are currently, doing your PhD or doing your master's degrees or in education and building a side hustle. I absolutely love it. My degree was in environmental science. So I actually studied wallaby foraging strategies through olfactory cues, which is a little bit different than what I'm doing right now. But I know a lot of the way that I was looking at research really translates into, how we crunch data here in people and culture at Kinde. I'm gonna stop doing that. So Kinde is a company that is creating development infrastructure for software teams. And what we really want to do is create a world with more founders, a world with more yous. We really want all of you to be able to bring your visions to life. And we want to equip you with the tools that you need to get started, so you can really focus on bringing these amazing ideas and these amazing products to the world and really start changing and shaping the world that we live in. So we want to give you those tools to be able to do just that. So when we are hiring for diverse teams, we really need to not just think about diversity, but we need to think about diversity, equity, and inclusion as a whole. So instead of jumping straight into hiring for diverse teams, I want to first talk about the tenets of DEI and then how to actually set up your organization so you can have those diverse folks come in and actually feel the benefits of having a diverse team. So talking about those benefits of diversity, equity, and inclusion, we know through lots of research that product development and performance is increased when you have diversity, equity, and inclusion front of mind. Inclusive teams are way better at making decisions faster, which, we know can always be a really long kind of painful process when one person has one idea and another person has another idea. When you focus on inclusivity, you really create an environment where people feel comfortable voicing their opinions. And when those decisions are made, they actually deliver better outcomes as well when they're made by diverse folks. Diversity at the leadership level is incredibly important. So there's lots of different studies that look at both gender diversity and ethnicity diversity at the leadership level and showing greater profits and greater performance of teams. And then retention. So when you have an inclusive environment and when you focus on equitable outcomes for your diverse staff, we see that there's greater psychological safety, there's more creativity, there's greater well-being, and that ultimately leads to, your amazing people in your organization staying longer, which is better for everybody. So going back to the kind of very basics of what DEI mean, and I'm sure many of you are already across all of this considering that you're here today, but I just want to quickly talk about it. So diversity is the range of differences in people. So that can be anything in this list, many things outside of this list as well. But, a lot of the top ones companies focus on from the start would be, gender diversity, ethnicity, your caregiver status. So, your parents, if you have people who are parents in your team, but also those who might be taking care of grandparents or who might be, taking care of siblings as well. Age, socioeconomic class, many others. Then we have equality. So equality is really about understanding that not everybody has the same starting position in life. So how do we try and drive equitable outcomes for everybody, knowing that we're all starting at different places? So that can include things like looking at salaries, how you give promotions to people in your company, even role responsibility. So making sure that the women in the organization aren't always the one expected to be taking the notes and doing the administrative work if it isn't part of their role description. And then we have inclusion. So how everybody in that organization is recognized and how they are valued as well. So that can be things around, how you make decisions as an organization. Is everybody a part of that decision-making process who needs to be? The language you use within your organization, which I'll touch upon a little bit later. Making sure there's equal participation. So, it's not always the the loudest person in the room who's getting heard, right? We're making space for those people who might not be the loudest, most A-type personalities. The policies that you have. And I know policies is something that's like a very big organization thing, but even at a small level, what are the informal policies that you have? What can you put on paper that people know, even informally, is a policy of your company? And your ways of working as well, which I'll chat about a little bit later on. And then outside of your diversity, equity, and inclusion, I really just want to mention intersectionality as well. So intersectionality is the ways that different systems of oppression are overlapping. So when we think about gender, we think about men, women, our non-binary folks. Then we think about diversity, or we think about ethnicity, right? And we kind of think of them as two separate things sometimes when we're designing our environments, but we want to start thinking about where those intersect. So perhaps it's looking at Indigenous women and how are they actually experiencing kind of two different overlapping barriers that they have against them in getting into your organization and then staying within your organization. So I'll touch upon that from time to time as well when we're talking about setting up your environment or your work environment. And I just want to touch upon startup challenges as well when it does come to all things DEI, when it comes to hiring and focusing on DEI at the same time. It can be really tricky. Brand recognition is a super tricky one, and I know Kind, is often, still struggling with brand recognition when we're advertising. Not getting that volume of applicants that you're looking for, and not getting the volume of applicants from diverse communities. Limited time, time is not a luxury that startups have, particularly when you're burning cash as you're taking time to hire. So how do we look at time and make sure we're optimizing it when we are hiring? And then budgets as well. We are not Canvas, we are not Atlassians, and maybe we will be one day. But how do we actually compete with those really audacious salaries that the Canvas and the Atlassians and the CBAs and all the banks are offering to all of the candidates in Australia, it seems. And why even are we focusing on any of this right now? And again, I think I'm really going to be preaching to the converted here about why we're focusing on this, but I know you all have products to build and you've got customers that you're trying to attract, but we really want to be focusing on hiring for a diverse team and setting up an equitable environment so we don't experience a diversity debt later on. So where we see diversity debt is where a company starts up and says, let's worry about that later. Like, let's build our product. Like, let's go, let's start bringing, cash in. And then later on, when there are 100 people, they're like, ooh, we actually have a company of people who are all sort of the same. And we're really skewing heavy of having an entire engineering team full of men, because that's generally what happens when we try and hire really, really fast. And then they panic and they're like, right, so we've got to actually stop everything that we're doing and only hire diverse folks. And that's really, really difficult to do. But when you focus on that balance early on, you can really still hire the right people. You can move pretty quickly and focus on diversity at the same time if we're doing it thoughtfully from the start. So again, hold on. I'm not going to talk about hiring yet. I'm still going to talk about, making sure that we're setting up your organization to focus on being equitable and being inclusive. And once we do that, we will see the benefits of diversity in your teams. So in setting up your foundations, we want to make sure that your company is set up for everybody. So I'll touch upon some of these as we go. But how do you work? Like, how do you and the people in your company work? Are you setting meeting agendas for your neurodiverse folks who really need to prepare for meetings before they come in? We all know what happens when you drop an invite into someone's diary with like no explanation of what's going to go on, and people show up feeling like really nervous, perhaps that they don't know what's going to happen, or they could have prepared beforehand to make the meeting a little bit more I suppose, productive. So setting those agendas really helps. Understanding availability for folks who might be parents as well. So maybe they've got to skip school pickup because a meeting was booked in a time where they have to go and do that, but you just didn't know and it wasn't intentional. Language in your organization. So how might you be unintentionally using racist language, and how can you strip that from your organization? So think about things like, when you're saying you're having a meeting, some people will say, oh, let's have a powwow. And in Canada, a powwow is something that is very spiritual and has a lot of meaning. And so using it as a regular day-to-day business activity is quite offensive. Or, setting up tribes within your organizations is incredibly common language. Or in engineering, the master-slave relationship. How are we thinking about the way that we're using language in the organization that might just be the way we've always done it, and it's super unintentional, but it really, really matters when we're bringing diverse folks into our organizations. Documentation. So again, how you're just helping those people who learn in a different way, making sure things are written down, and also the accessibility of the things that you're documenting to make sure everyone has that equal understanding to do the very best in their roles. Setting up your values. So, at Kind, we've really intentionally focused on having values that are all encompassing of wanting to be a diverse organization and equitable and including everybody. So thinking about your values and how you want people to live and breathe in your organization, is it making sure we're taking diverse folks into account? And then policies. So again, I mentioned this before, but what are the ways that we can set up, formal or informal policies to make sure that everyone feels included? And I will go into all of this in more detail. So I want to start out by talking about some of the foundations that we've set up here at Kind, and hopefully there's something that you can start thinking about if you've not already in your organization. But one of the things that we focused on straight away was gender. And again, knowing that diversity is more than just gender, but it was a really great place to start. We focused on our 40-40-20 goal. So what that means is looking at having at least 40% men, at least 40% women, and then 20% any gender. And now why we've done that is, we could have maybe 45% men and 45% women, and then 10% non-binary folks. But what we didn't want to do was hold ourselves to that 50-50 men and women, because then what we're doing is we're forgetting that there's a whole nother group of people who, aren't cisgendered. And then we're also saying we're always going to be 50-50. And when you're a small company and you have one person join or one person leave, those numbers are really going to swing in roundabouts. Then everyone panics because we're not 50-50, we're 70% men all of a sudden. And so we want to leave a little bit of room for a growing organization in that 20%. And then how we measure it at all levels. So individual contributors, the leadership team, our executive team, and even your board of directors, if you have one now or if you're going to have one later. And then we also look at it across all of our different teams. So our different departments, locations, and the entire company. So you've got to make sure that you're really kind of slicing and dicing that data and how you're measuring, because if, your entire marketing team is women and your entire engineering team is men, which is really easily done. And then you measure everything at a company level, you're like, yeah, we're doing it. We're 40-40-20. But then when you look at it at a granular level, you're not doing it. And where the benefits of diversity are seen is actually at the team level and not at the organization level, which is why it's so important to chop up your data. Another thing that we're doing at Kind is setting up lots and lots of wonderful policies, and I just wanted to share some of them with you. And again, I understand that, these might not be things that you can focus on straight away, but, we've really made a point of focusing on parental leave. So 12 weeks parental leave for all family constructs, for any gender, plus an additional 4 weeks for the birthing parents. We also have family and domestic violence leave. So that's 10 days if, your employees or their family or even their close friends are experiencing family or domestic violence, knowing that we can be able to help them out and also help them change their financial details and institutions if so needed. Flexible public holidays. So this one's a personal favorite of mine because one, it's super easy to set up. Two, it is actually no cost to the business. So any organization can go and do this. And 3, the reason why I also love this one is because legally in Australia, employees can already do this. So really being able to highlight this is already something that employees can ask for, but you just want to make sure everyone knows this is something they have access to and the business supports. So what that means is the public holiday next Thursday in Australia, if, for example, an employee does not want to take that, they can say, I'm not interested in taking that public holiday and I want to swap it for another day that's more meaningful to me. And where this really is handy is when you look at the Australian public holiday calendar, and all our public holidays are really centered around Christian public holidays, but not every single person in your organization is going to be Christian. So you're going to have people from all different religious backgrounds and ethnic backgrounds. And so how do you make sure that they can utilize public holidays for the things that really matter to them without having to take annual leave? And then lastly, compassionate leave. And so we've made sure that our compassionate leave policy doesn't just cover death and illness, but it also covers miscarriage and abortion. And again, that's not just for those who are experiencing, the pregnancy loss, but also for the partners as well that need to be there to support. But what I would say is, I know this is a lot. So when you are thinking about all of the different ways that you can set up your organization to be inclusive, if you're going to take away anything from all of this different, foundational work, just remember to design for the edge. And so what that means is when you are designing your policies, your ways of working, your, gender balance goals, you want to be thinking about who are the edge cases that I'm designing for? Where is that that intersectional, diversity that I'm looking for? And so if we design our organization while we're thinking about, disabled people or Indigenous women, those people who are truly experiencing a lot of barriers, we actually see amazing outcomes and benefits for everybody in the organization. Okay, hiring. So let's actually get to hiring and talk about setting up your hiring practices to find diverse folks and bring them into the organization now that you have this amazing foundational work already done. So here are all the components of an equitable hiring process. We're going to talk about your role requirements. So, location, your skills, working hours, qualifications. We can read the points. We're also going to talk about your job advertisement. So, how are you advertising and how are you optimizing for diverse candidates to be applying to those advertisements? Your interview process. And this one's always the chunkiest and the hardest one to work through, especially if you are not super familiar with interviewing or comfortable interviewing. It's definitely a practice skill. And then I want to just talk about biases. We all have them. They're definitely traps. We all have unintentional biases as well that sneak through. So I want to talk about how we could try our very best to design them out in the process. So first up is your role requirements. So when you're thinking about this person that you wanted, let's say we're hiring for our software engineer, and in your head, you've got somebody in mind. I want you to really think carefully about that optimal candidate. And, if you need all of those particular requirements of that person. So the first one being flexibility. Now, I know most of us are already embracing hybrid and remote working. I can't imagine everybody on this call has an office set up anyways that would require somebody commuting in, but think about the way that hybrid working can really be embraced. Even think about the hours, how flexible can we really make the hours for this position? Can we even make it a job share? Do we have a couple back to work parents that can share the responsibilities of this role? How creative can you be whilst also building your product and building your company? Education and qualification. So this one is something that, is really, it's really important to drive home that think about if you actually need those qualifications. A lot of companies will just slap on a qualification. They'll say yeah, it needs to be certified in whatever, or needs to have done X number of years of education. And, education doesn't always mean that somebody's the most qualified person to do the role. And also thinking about education from an accessibility standpoint, education is not always accessible. And so by creating educational requirements, you're automatically filtering out people who haven't had the privilege of ease of access to education. The couple exceptions I would say are finance, for having like your CPA, or, legal, if you need someone to be a practicing lawyer. Of course, then you need certifications, but rethink education. And then experience. Do you actually need someone to have 10 years experience in X technology, or is somebody with 5 years experience who's still learning, but, a really keen learner going to work? Or leadership. If you're hiring somebody who needs 5 years of leadership experience, we often see that women are overlooked for leadership positions, and it's not due to their ability or, their skills. But mostly we just see men are often chosen for leadership positions over women. And so therefore they're already at a disadvantage of having less leadership experience, but not skills. So how can we actually think about our requirements around years of experience in those particular skills? All right, so you've got your requirements down, and now you're actually going to post your advertisements. Where do we do it and how do we do it? So thinking about your platforms, LinkedIn's great. I absolutely love LinkedIn. It's awesome to have your job on LinkedIn. Everyone's on LinkedIn for the most part, and everyone's interacting with it. Job alerts, it's great, but where else can you post your advertisement to make it visible to diverse candidates? Can it be Work 180 to highlight your role to women? Applied, that is a paid one, Applied, but they really focus on diverse candidates and diverse applications. Pink Jobs for jobs that are friendly for LGBTQ+ folks. Or can you think about where you have your brand showing up? So Kinde Fertility has a page that's focused around companies who have implemented leave for pregnancy loss. So once we created our compassionate leave to include pregnancy loss, we have our brand up on the Kinde Fertility website. And it's really just a place where someone can go and see that, yes, you're an employer who is considered about their policies for women or about pregnancy loss. Requirements. So keep it short and sweet. We don't want to see a humongous laundry list of requirements. One, you will lose a candidate. They'll be scrolling. They're probably looking at the job advertisement on their phone, and then they're going to give up after like 2 or 3, scrolls down the page. But another thing to think about with requirements is that research has shown that women will want to meet 100% of their requirements before they apply, where men will want to meet 60% of the criteria. And so you're going to have women who are self-selecting out if you put in just your wish list of stuff that you kind of hope a candidate will have. So try and keep it to 5 or 6 points. Your lingo. So Australia loves lingo and loves a little bit of slang. And there's also a lot of lingo and slang that's super industry specific. So think about how a candidate who's maybe not from a technical background, or if you're a SaaS company, are they from a SaaS background? They might not need to be, so don't use SaaS specific language. Or also think about people who speak English as a second language. Really make sure that the language in your advertisement can be understood by everybody. And then language. So I know we've done lingo, but now we're going to do language, which is a little bit different. But and I'll go into this a little bit more in the next slide because I'm really passionate about it. But think about the way you're describing the role and the way you're describing your organization. Language can often be masculine coded or feminine coded, which will again have candidates self-selecting out. So I'm going to go into that a little bit more because I know it can be a little bit confusing, but I use a platform called Gender Decoder, which is an awesome platform. And what you do is you basically whack your job advertisement into Gender Decoder, and it'll tell you if your advertisement is strongly masculine coded or masculine coded feminine or strongly feminine. And why that matters is you will have female or women candidates self-select out and be deterred when looking at a masculine coded job advertisement. What will not happen is if you have a feminine coded job advertisement, men will not select out, they will also apply anyways. So you're actually better off using these feminine coded words in your job advertisements. And to be really clear, this does not mean that men are really good at being driven, determined, ambitious, and women are not. These aren't the skills that men and women have. It's just the way that the words are coded and the way that men and women read job advertisements. But anyways, I encourage you all to check out Gender Decoder. It's really, really cool. You'll spend a lot of time going through your competitors' adverts and chucking them in there as well and being like, I knew it. All right. So you've got your job advertisement, you've got your requirements, your job's advertised, and now candidates are starting to come through. And it's just more of a bias check, this particular slide, but I've kind of given it away here for the first little bit, but there was this really interesting study that was done in Germany. And there was a, 3 fictitious female applicants who all had identical job applications. The only thing that was different was the picture on the job, or the picture on their application, and the name. So you can see here, Sandra Bauer is a German sounding name. We have Miriam, who is a Turkish sounding name, but again, the same picture. And then you have the same Turkish sounding name, but you have the candidate now wearing a headscarf. And they did an assessment to see the callback rates that these identical applications got, but the only difference was their headshot. Sandra got called back 19% of the time. Miriam got called back 14% of the time. And Miriam with a headscarf got called back only 4% of the time. It's absolutely shocking. And there's so many studies that have done the exact same thing. I think there was an Andy and a Mohammed. And the only thing that changed was the name, and the experience was the same. Andy got 10 interviews, Mohammed got 4. And so it's all about just making sure that you're checking in with yourself and maybe asking a colleague to review an application as well. If you can kind of feel some biases creep in, or you feel that that's a gut decision or a snap decision of they're not right for the role. Your brain wants to take shortcuts, and don't let it do it. So you now have your candidates that have come through. You found these amazing candidates, all different, diverse candidates as well. How do you make sure that their experience through the interview process is also as fair as possible? So you've done all this really hard work, and now we need to make sure that candidates aren't opting out, or you're not selecting candidates out who are actually really relevant for the role just because your process isn't equitable. So consistency is key. So you want to be using the same measuring stick for the candidates that are interviewing for the same role. So what are the questions that you're asking, and are they the same questions to every single candidate? So at Kind, we would have about 5 or 6 questions that are your baseline questions that every single candidate for the same job gets asked. And of course, you're going to, have ones that are going off on a little bit of a tangent, or digging a little bit deeper and exploring unique experiences of this candidates, but making sure you have that base set of questions so you're measuring each candidate the same is super important. Skills-based, so asking more about the skills this person can bring to the role rather than the exact experience that they have or the company that they worked at before. You're all probably building products that have never been built before. So you're not going to be looking for someone who's done the exact same thing before. Look for those skills that are going to come in and provide this really unique angle to what it is that you're building. Having multiple interviewers is also really beneficial. So where possible, have around maybe 2, 3, 4 different people involved. You may all have these little sneaky unconscious biases. We all have them, but the more people that you have involved in the process, the more you're going to be able to sort of filter out some of those biases along the way. And then rethink referrals. So what I mean by this is, yes, you can have referrals. We're all startups. We need to be able to reach out to our networks and convince them to join us on this really amazing, ambitious journey. But what you need to start thinking about is, do we want all referrals? Because quite typically, the referrals that are people who are going to be really similar to you, or maybe they're from an organization where you worked in a team that was a lot of people just like you with the same background like you. And there's been lots of research around referrals, but this one that stood out to me was that, white men are at least 2 times as more likely to get jobs through networks than people of color. So just start to think about how you can either tap into your team to branch out, who they might be referring, or how you can make sure you have the same rigorous process for referrals as the people who are coming in as applicants. Another really interesting study I wanted to bring up on the interviewing side of things is there was this study that was done around venture capitals and the funding that women entrepreneurs were getting versus male entrepreneurs. And they found that the questions that VCs were asking men and women were so different. They found that, male entrepreneurs were getting asked questions that were promotion focused, whereas female entrepreneurs were getting prevention focused questions. So what that means is they were asking men, tell us about the opportunities for this product or the opportunities for expansion. And then they were asking women entrepreneurs, tell us what's stopping you from expanding. What are your limitations? And again, it was an unconscious thing. I'm sure these VCs were not asking those questions purposefully, but they didn't have consistency. Those questions weren't written down for every single person. And so unconsciously, they were asking those sorts of questions to disadvantage the women founders. It's a super interesting study. And the last thing I want to mention is the old culture fit interview. We all want to build these amazing cultures, and we all want to make sure that people are coming in who really kind of believe in this culture that we're building. And so I want to talk about the language around culture fit versus culture add. And at the end of the day, I guess it doesn't really matter what you call it. It's all about the sentiment around it, but I want to talk about it anyways. And that when you're talking about culture fit, you're talking about this culture that you've already created, and you want to bring people in who fit into that culture. And that doesn't really allow us to kind of expand those experiences of people we bring in. And so we want to talk instead about culture add. We want to bring people in who have the same values and really kind of believe in the mission and the vision that you have, but they're going to add to your culture and not fit into the one that you've already created with, the 5, 10, 15, 20 people that you already have there. So this is our process. This is how we recruit people. This is how we try and be as inclusive as possible when we are interviewing and equitable. The first thing that we do is we have an initial screen. So, we have a resume come in, and then we do a 30 to 45-minute video screen. We ask some high-level questions around role-related knowledge. We set some expectations with the candidate, of what we're looking for, but we also ask them what they're looking for. We want to make sure this relationship is really going to be right from the start. We have our functional interview, which is essentially just the skills-based interview. Can this candidate talk the talk? Are they saying the things that, we really want to hear when it comes to this particular role? We also have a work assessment. And so this is the walk the walk piece. And this one's really important because you can have some people who are very good at talking the talk, particularly when you're recruiting salespeople. If they're selling you, they're doing a really good job of it. But we want to see them actually in action. And so what we can do is, we give candidates something that's either take home or something that they can do on the spot that actually demonstrates their skills. And again, it's that skills based, right? We're not looking at someone who's like been at Atlassian and who's been at Canva, so they must be amazing. And they can talk the talk. We want them to prove it. And this is where you can really kind of level the playing field when you ask people to demonstrate their skills. And then we have our values interview. So we have some set questions, one question for each value that we have, which is 6 of them, just to, make sure the candidate, knows our values. So we talk about our values in this interview a lot, but making sure that, they believe in them and that they live them as well. And this doesn't have to be a 4-stage process as well. You can squash this up into 2. You can combine 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, 2 and 3, whatever it might be. So don't feel that this has to be a 4-stage long process. Make it as short and sweet as works for you in the time that you have, of course. Oh, I did it again. And then our bias traps. So this is something that we all have. This is something that, in my years as a recruiter, I still have to check, and I still notice them creeping in when I'm reading resumes and when I'm doing interviews. not all of these, of course, I would hope at one time, but every once in a while, they do sneak up on me. These are some of the most common ones. So you're stereotyping. And I know, I would hope that people aren't too much looking at someone's gender or their education or their name, but something that catches a lot of people is their previous employer. Oh man, they've worked at Atlassian, they must be amazing. But at Atlassian, the recruiter said, oh, they've worked at Google, they must be amazing. And the person at Google said, oh my gosh, they worked at Canva, they must be amazing. And no one, everyone's had that same bias trap the entire way through. And in reality, the candidate might not actually be that good. Or the same can be said for an organization that we might think isn't amazing. And again, that's all a bias as well. I'm very aware of that, but you want to be able to look at people's skills and not where they've worked before. We have our nonverbal bias trap. So this used to be, looking at people's their appearance or their height or things that we can't actually see on video interviews anymore. But in a remote world, everyone's looking what's going on in the background and is their room messy? Are there kids back there? Is there a cat running across the screen? We've got to kind of just remember to not be evaluating the person's background and what their home life is like, because everyone's different, and really just kind of focus on the task at hand. I personally love when a cat runs across the screen. That's just me. But again, positive bias, I don't know. First impression. So this one was a big one, the old floppy handshake means you're not really good at your job, and hard handshake means something completely different. I know we're not doing that many handshakes anymore, but this is all about that gut feel. What is that snap decision you're making? Are you coming out of that interview and saying, I knew within the first 5 minutes? You did not. You knew nothing about that candidate in 5 minutes. You didn't even give them an opportunity. So checking that snap decision, that gut feeling that you're having all the time. And then the just like me. So I caught myself doing this recently with a Canadian candidate, and it was really bad. And I kind of thought after 5 minutes of really getting on with her, I need to stop myself and actually focus on the interview. So it's all about favoring somebody because they're like you. They have the same educational background, or, the same hobbies, or they look like you, or they talk like you, or they're just like somebody in your team who's amazing. But just because they're just like that person, or they come from the same background, doesn't always mean they're going to be amazing. And if they are we really wanting to hire a lot of the same people within your team anyways? These are just some common ones. And when you start feeling comfortable pulling yourself up, pull up your colleague, pull up your co-founder. Make sure that we're always talking about these things when we're reviewing feedback and we're reviewing resumes. So I want to revisit the startup challenges again that we talked about at the very start. So you have no brand recognition, not a problem. Focus on your brand placement. Focus on your advertisement placement. Focus on the language in your advertisement. Focus on bringing out the amazing policies and the values within your advertisements. I guarantee you that candidates will start saying, it sounds like an amazing place to work, or your culture sounds amazing, or I've heard amazing things about your culture, just by the way that you write and the places that you have your advertisements will already get you that recognition that you're looking for. You don't have any time. That's why we have these amazing processes that we've just all created together in our interview process. It's really streamlined. We know the questions that we're going to be asking. We're all going to be having alignment because we have consistency. We're all using the exact same measuring stick for our candidates. And then, knowing that we can all have agreement quicker because we've created an equitable process that will all shorten your time to hire. And then limited budgets. So candidates, and there's lots of research around this, but candidates aren't looking for, the highest salaries anymore. Maybe some candidates are, but, mostly candidates are looking for organizations that have incredible values and are inclusive and support their diverse workforce, and that are flexible and allow them to be parents as well. And so when you design for that edge, you're actually going to outcompete these companies that haven't even thought at all about inclusivity, but are paying, $250K. You're absolutely going to be way better off in the short term and in the long term. Okay, So after all of this, and I know it was a lot, and you're probably all thinking, okay, that was great, but like, what am I even doing? Like, where do I even start with these 101 things that we've just spoken about? So here's the top 5 things that you can do right now that are free as well. You can build those inclusive ways of working. You can look at, when you're setting up meetings, how you're sharing documentation, how you're sharing information, how you're creating jobs, and are they flexible, and are they job share opportunities? You can create those inclusive policies and practices. So, you can, the first one you could do is your flexible public holidays. That one's a super easy one to do. Let people be able to use days that are meaningful for them. You can audit your external and internal language. So you can look at the ways that you're referring to things within your company. You can also look at the language you're using externally in things like job advertisements by, whacking your advertisement in Gender Decoder, for example. You can design your equitable interview process. So just by standardizing the questions that you're asking, that's already one step in the right direction. And it's something that will make your life way, way easier when you're interviewing. And the last one is data. And I know, all of you will probably appreciate the value of data. And so we don't know if we're doing a good job unless we actually have data to measure. And so are we setting ourselves up, our 40-40-20 goals maybe, or are we, looking at the number of women coming into the company, but maybe women leaving the company, just making sure that, you're starting to track your data and starting to see areas in which you can improve. And even asking your employees in a survey, do you feel included at my company? And then asking that again in 6 months' time and seeing if you've improved, and if you've not, actioning that and figuring out what you can do next. Thank you. All right, we've come to the end. Any questions that anyone has for me, I'd love to answer them.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Sam, for your time and sharing your insights and experience. I'm going to encourage the audience to jump in here as well before I jump in with a bunch of questions that have been sent to me. I'd love to hear from the audience that are here live, or if you are in the co-working space, just send something through.
I'm going to stop sharing so I can see all.
Oh, awesome.
I have a question.
Nick.
Yeah, have you done, is there been a lot of research done in how like the end user of your product or service thinks about having a diverse workforce, or is it just the benefit mostly just having a good team and for your organization? Or do people actually care about like using companies that are doing good?
Yes, they do. Millennials are on it, and they are looking for companies that have diversity, equity, and inclusion goals. They're looking for inclusive organizations. They're looking really closely at the language companies are using as well. And arguably, if you've got a diverse team creating those marketing materials or creating that language, you're going to probably avoid being canceled publicly on Twitter. But yes, people are absolutely looking at that. And they're also looking at things like, are companies socially responsible? Are they environmentally responsible? So they're absolutely looking at all of those different factors in the wider corporate social responsibility. And then you'll also see the outputs of your customers experiencing the benefits of that when you have diverse folks actually building your products. You'll have somebody putting their hand up, maybe they're colorblind, and maybe they're like, hey, this is a horrible design. I can't tell what is what and where I'm clicking. And then you'll have an end user now who gets the benefits of having, that particular diverse designer or engineer, whoever, helping make decisions for that product. And then they will feel included in using your product as well. Good question.
Thanks, Nick. And any other questions from those on the call at the moment?
I might actually jump in. Keen to ask the question. Do you have any tips on where to find templates for policies? Because I think they could be a bit daunting for blank pieces of paper in front of some founders.
Yes, absolutely. Let me pull together a few websites and I can send them through. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I know we use Legal Vision. We pay for their services, but I know they have some free things posted online. I think Culture Amp possibly has some like inclusive and diversity guidelines that you might be able to use for informal policies as well. But that's a really good question. I'll check over a whole bunch of resources after this, and I will include that on my list of resources.
Amazing, thanks, Sam. And I can send those out to everyone on the call and those that missed this session. That would be amazing to share. So thank you. I had a question around, I love that you mentioned getting creative around designing a role. Do you design for flexibility, for inclusion? Do you have a great example of something that you've done at Kind around designing a flexible or being flexible with a role?
Yes. So our finance manager, maybe I've got two, not to like toot our own horn here, but our finance manager, Tanya, she was overseas with her partner. And, you know, she said, oh, I couldn't possibly start a new role right now. I've got, you know, kids and like, you know, I'm overseas right now and there's so much going on and, you know, it's just not fair to Kind. And we were like, well, hold on, you're amazing. We can work with you. Like, how can we be as flexible as possible? Because we really want you on the team. And she started out working 2 days a week, working from France. And so she was still able to be there for her family, you know, be able to be there to support her partner while he was working overseas. And then once she moved back, we then started to, you know, increase her working days at her request, of course. And then we also hired our head of marketing while she was on parental leave as well. We knew we wanted her. She was on parental leave. We were like, yep, hired, let's have you, and then we will work with you on creating your role coming into Kind and what works for you best as a parent. So she started working at 2 days, then upped it to 3, and now she's working 4 days a week. But again, it was all about making sure that, you know, when she wanted to do that, it was the right time for her and it was the right time for her family as well.
Awesome, great to hear examples like that. I find I know Monash has a flexible workplace policy, and Zelma's there for designing roles. But yeah, always great to hear like what is happening in the real world. We've just had another question come through. How would you manage working with those outside your home country when recruiting those overseas?
Yes, so hiring overseas workers, I'm assuming,
Yes.
is the question. Okay. So we have a lot, I mean, I'm in Canada right now, but we actually have 2 employees over in the UK. We've got a new starter who is going to be based in Australia, but he's joining us next week from Chile. Or if the members of the founding team are overseas too. Great question. So this comes back to what I said around documentation. So at Kind, we have a always open policy. Well, not even a policy, like a way of working, one of those informal policies, ways of working, where we make sure that everything that we do as a team, you know, projects, tidbits of information is always publicly available to everybody. So I could jump into, you know, Andre's space and our Notion page and just snoop around on what he's doing and really get to know the projects and stuff that he's working on. Same goes for, you know, my people and culture board on Notion. But having that information be accessible is a great way to break down those barriers of overseas employees who feel like, oh, I'm not in that meeting, or I'm not in that all hands. And now I feel like I have no clue what's going on and I have no context to what I'm working on. So having that documentation, recording your meetings and making those recordings available are super, super important. And then we also have Slack. You know, we live and breathe Slack, I'm sure as many of you do, but making sure to keep things in public channels in Slack as well. So if I've got a question for Ollie, for example, on partnerships, I'm not just going to ask Ollie, because then that's siloed information that no one else has access to. I'm going to ask it in our relevant, you know, partnerships channel. And that way, anybody else who's maybe been having the same question, or, you know, I go to sleep and they wake up with that question in their head, it's already there for them to be answered so they can continue on with their day.
I love that over communication and overshare. Let's keep going on the chat. How do you deal with potential stigma of people coming in as diversity hires as we transition towards a more diverse hiring focus?
Yeah, so tokenism is something that can really be felt if you don't have that equitable, inclusive framework to your organization. So going out and plucking, somebody out of thin air and saying like, yeah, we need you because you're a balanced person or because you're our token member of the LGBTQ plus community. If you've not set up your organization for that, it's going to feel like that. And when you set up your organization and communicate that, what we're doing is creating an inclusive environment, you're hopefully bringing the rest of your team on that journey. So when that person is hired, they're not like, oh, token hire, right? They know that you've set up this interview process and you've set up this framework to hire the best person. And the best person may just be that diverse hire. And then the last thing I'll say about this is, it's important to always remember that. And someone said this not too long ago in a diversity presentation that, okay, well, if we're hiring women engineers, we're obviously ignoring good men engineers. And that is of the assumption that men are inherently born with more skills than women in a particular set of skills. Men aren't born better at engineering. Everyone starts on the same level playing field, but people are just given different opportunities. And so what it is that we're doing is to level the playing field. We need to actually think about the advantages and opportunities others have been given and make sure that in coming in and in interviewing for roles, we're going to level that playing field. And that might be saying, look, we're not going to be interviewing 10 men and 1 woman. We're going to be interviewing, 2 and 2, and making sure that, we're being as fair to those people who have had unequal experiences coming up through their careers as possible. That's a really, really good question.
Awesome. Thanks, Sam. I'm really conscious also of the time that we're at and the time that you've shared with us today, and the time in Canada, in what was it, North Saskatchewan, which must be getting late at night now. Yeah,
8:30, not a problem.
Okay, well, I'm very thankful that we've had yourself and the crew at Kind come out and share their knowledge with us at Monash. I know Andre is here in the co-working space and keen to meet some of our founders here. So we'll do a bit of that next. But thank you so much for inspiring us. I know, equity, diversity, inclusion is something that is spoken about here at Monash and is high on the agenda, and hopefully is for all the startups that we bring through our community as well. So a massive thank you from us at the Monash community. And any last thoughts from yourself?
This has been absolutely wonderful. I love a spicy question. The questions have been incredible. You've all been great. Thank you so much. And like I said, I'll send through some resources, but I'll do it tomorrow because I'm going to go join my parents around a bonfire right now. But anyways, it was lovely to meet all of you. Thank you again for coming. And if you have any other questions as well, feel free to shoot them through if you forgot to ask anything.
Amazing. Thank you, Sam. Go enjoy that bonfire, enjoy your night, and stay in touch. Okay. Bye, everyone.
Cheers.